I was forced by Tom and my mother-in-law to take care of my father-in-law who had dementia. Despite feeling nearly broken, I did my best in return for the kindness he had always shown me. 10 years later, when father-in-law passed away, both Tom and his mother hurled cruel words at me as I cried. "You're probably relieved, aren't you? Stop pretending to be the good wife." Then, with a nasty smile, they said, "Now that the caregiving's over, get divorced and get out. You're an eyesore. I have a mistress and an illegitimate child. I have no use for you anymore." I wasn't too surprised. Now that father-in-law was gone, I had no attachment to this house anymore. I filled out the divorce papers Tom thrust at me, took my personal belongings, and Tom's keepsake sewing box, and left the house the next day. As I started the car, I felt a boiling anger inside. Foolish people. Do they think I'm just going to cry myself to sleep? Just you wait. I'll avenge the disregard shown to Tom as well. I'm Mary, a 50-year-old housewife. Tom and I had an office romance and we've been married for 15 years. Although he's 2 years younger, he's capable and dependable, which gradually drew me to him. Eventually, Tom confessed his feelings and we started dating. He has a surprisingly needy side, which I found endearing given the contrast with his workplace persona. Tom was an only child and the son of a landowner. So naturally, we were expected to live with his parents. Honestly, I wasn't too upset about it. Having lost my father as a child and with poor relations with my mother who lives in a different state, I was excited about having a new family. When our marriage was settled, my in-laws rebuilt their 40-year-old house to accommodate 2 generations. I was thrilled about starting life with my new family, never imagining I'd be betrayed just a few years later. Initially, my mother-in-law, who had seemed so bright and kind, started treating me coldly because we hadn't had a child after 3 years of marriage. However, we never checked to see whether Tom or I was the cause of the infertility. We decided to leave it to nature whether we would have kids or not. We both thought that way. Besides, I loved my job and the workplace. Since graduating from college and joining my current company, I had diligently built up my record and had finally earned the position of supervisor. The work environment was good, so I wanted to continue working. Yet, my mother-in-law kept insisting that Tom, being her only son, needed an heir. All of Tom's cousins have lots of kids. We're the only ones without any. I want at least 3 kids, it's embarrassing. Isn't it a wife's job to bear children? Mary, aren't you ashamed? Hearing this all the time really got to me. But when I complained to Tom, his response was unexpected. There's nothing we can do if it just isn't happening. Try to understand my mom's feelings. It was supposed to be a decision we made together, yet it felt like I was being blamed. I was deeply disappointed. There were other reasons for my growing suspicions about Tom. We had promised to share household chores, but 6 months in, Tom started dumping them all on me. As soon as I complained, I was scolded by my mother-in-law. "Mary, did you tell Tom to do the chores?" Yes." My mother-in-law shook her head in dismay. "That's the problem with single parents, the upbringing just isn't there. A wife's duty is to raise an heir and manage the household. If you can't have kids, at least do the chores perfectly." Yes. Responding was a mistake. Since then, my mother-in-law started to nitpick and constantly threw snide remarks my way. As for Tom, he acted as if it had nothing to do with him, just laughing while watching TV or videos on his phone. Eventually, feeling emboldened, my mother-in-law began to demand that I prepare dinner whenever she went out. Even though she's a stay-at-home wife. And after making me cook, she would find fault with everything. Fish, really? I was in the mood for meat tonight. I prefer it less seasoned. Not enough veggies. Just because you don't eat it doesn't mean you should skimp. Talking back would only bring about 10 times more sarcasm. But unexpectedly, an unlikely ally stepped in. It's rude to criticize when she cooked for you. While enduring the usual barrage, my father-in-law, who was reading the newspaper at the table, spoke up with a grim face. He usually stays out of it, showing no concern for whatever my mother-in-law says to me. He's a man of few words, probably preferring to stay out of trouble. That's why, of course, both Tom and I were surprised. If you have complaints, you should cook yourself. Just because Mary doesn't fight back doesn't mean you can take advantage of her. After coming to her senses, my mother-in-law snapped back. You stay out of this. Disciplining the daughter-in-law is my role. Tom, you're Mary's husband, yet you always turn a blind eye. I think your attitude is problematic too. Caught off guard, Tom stumbled over his words. Well, a wife should obey her mother-in-law, right? Muttering, Tom found agreement from my mother-in-law, her face turning red. That's right. You stay out of this. It does involve me. We're family, after all. My father-in-law shrugged as if to say, oh well. With a disgruntled look, my mother-in-law grabbed Tom and they drove off somewhere. When I thanked my father-in-law, he hung his head in shame. I didn't want to cause trouble with my wife and son, so I turned a blind eye. I'm sorry. I quickly responded. No, I'm sorry too for not getting along with them. Not at all. Mary, you're doing just fine. Tears nearly came to my eyes at my father-in-law's kind smile. He had been watching me, after all. Even though my mother-in-law's snide attacks continued, in front of my father-in-law, she swallowed her harsh words or toned them down, and I was deeply grateful for that. By the time Tom and I had been married for 5 years, a deep rift had developed between myself, Tom, and my mother-in-law. To be precise, a dynamic had formed where my father-in-law was on my side, and Tom was on my mother-in-law's side. Living under one roof in this situation sometimes felt suffocating. I thought about divorcing several times, but the thought of not being able to see my father-in-law if I severed ties with Tom kept me from going through with it. As my heart grew apart from Tom and my mother-in-law, my interactions with my father-in-law became my only small joy. After retiring, my father-in-law, who was rehired at a factory, would eagerly take out his toolbox on weekends, build a decorative shelf, or paint the garden fence. His figure reminded me of my own father, who had loved woodworking, and it was comforting. Perhaps influenced by my father, I too enjoy crafting. Recently, when my old sewing box broke and I looked online for a new one, nothing seemed right. When I was at a loss, my father-in-law offered to make one for me. The next week, he finished a retro-style sewing box that was very practical and exactly what I wanted. When I thanked him and asked how much I owed him, he waved his hand shyly and declined. It was just a good way to pass the time. If Mary uses it, that's thanks enough for me. Then, please let me at least pay for the materials. As I pulled out my wallet, my father-in-law stopped me with his hand. I'll use the leftover materials for something else. It's fine. Since he adamantly refused to take any money, I ended up accepting my father-in-law's kindness. And yet, despite his kindness, my mother-in-law despised him. Too serious and boring. Just an ATM. I wouldn't have married him if he hadn't been a landowner's son. She complains to Tom like that, and he agrees with her. I just couldn't understand it. As I was putting threads and a pincushion into the new sewing box, my father-in-law looked around. By the way, where did Mom and Tom go? I blinked. They went shopping together just a bit ago. Tom was complaining to you about being the bag carrier, wasn't he? Was that so? I felt a dissonance in my father-in-law's confused response. Lately, such exchanges had become more frequent. He'd forget the names of places we often visit, asking me to check on his phone, or he'd completely forget conversations we had just the day before. I was concerned about my father-in-law's changes, but I assumed it was just because of his age. Then, one day, an incident happened. On a holiday morning, my father-in-law went out to the hardware store and didn't return by dinner time. Normally, he would be back in 2 hours from the store, which is only a 10-minute walk away. It was highly unusual for him not to come home at night. I appealed to my mother-in-law and Tom, but they didn't take me seriously. He's probably stopped at other stores. Just leave him be. I couldn't reach my father-in-law by phone, and as my anxiety grew, a call came in from an unknown number. When I answered, the person on the other end claimed to be a convenience store manager. He said he was lost, so we took him in. He can't remember his home address either. What? I was at a loss for words. I borrowed his cell phone and used fingerprint recognition to open the address book, and called you from the call history, Mary. Shaken, I asked for the store's location and drove there in 20 minutes. Led by the staff to the back room, I found my father-in-law sitting in a chair, his large back hunched over. After thanking the manager and staff, we left the store with our purchases. Father, you had me worried. I tried to sound cheerful as I drove, but the father-in-law in the passenger seat just nodded with a pale face. After a while, he suddenly said, I realized I was at the hardware store. Not understanding, I looked at him in confusion, and my father-in-law gave a self-deprecating smile. I have no memory of leaving the house. I just thought I should head home, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't remember the way home or even my address. I felt the blood drain from my face. As I started walking aimlessly, everywhere I went seemed unfamiliar. I noticed calls from Mary but was too worried to answer. He said in a somber tone, his gaze distant like that of a stranger. After we got home and my father-in-law had gone to sleep, I opened up to Tom and his mother, who both showed genuine surprise. Isn't that serious? Yes, we'll go to the hospital tomorrow. The next day, I took my father-in-law to the hospital, where he was diagnosed with dementia. He was reluctant to accept it, but he nodded somberly as the doctor explained. According to Tom, his father had always prided himself on never having any serious illnesses. The idea that he could have something was beyond his comprehension. I immediately went to the city hall to apply for caregiving status. And after the evaluation, my father-in-law was assigned a caregiving level 1. It was hard to believe, but when I thought about his recent behavior, it made sense. I'll apply for the short-term caregiving work schedule at my company, I declared, trying to lift my spirits and inform Tom and his mother. That way, I can come home in half a day and get an exemption from overtime. I'll support Tom and your mother as much as I can. Then, both of them started making strange faces. What are you talking about, you? Quit your job right now. There's no way you can work while looking after him. Confused, I looked back and forth between them. Aren't the three of us going to take care of Dad together? His mother, a housewife with plenty of time. She was assumed to be the main caregiver. However, she shook her head in disbelief. This is the problem with daughters raised by a single parent, no common sense, she scolded. Tom quickly agreed. You're supposed to do the caregiving, you're the daughter-in-law. Just like Mom said. There are plenty of people who can replace you at work. Quitting won't be a problem at all. But. I hesitated, but my mother-in-law bluntly cut me off. Why don't you apply for the day service at the local clinic? It's all on you. Both Tom and I are busy. She stated, as if it was none of their concern, which infuriated me. Fine, I'll take care of my father-in-law myself. He has done so much for me in the past. Now, it's my turn to support him. Not to rely on those two and to manage with care consultations. I decided it. While my colleagues at work were pushing me into retirement, I studied dementia through books and online. To better understand and ease the burden on my father-in-law when interacting with him. Perhaps once caregiving started, my mother-in-law might help a bit. But, hopelessly, the two of them pushed all the caregiving responsibilities onto me. While my father-in-law's symptoms were mild, I accompanied him shopping and on walks as support. To prevent wandering during the day, we participated in community exercises at the park and tried brain training and word puzzles at home. As years passed, communication with my father-in-law gradually became more difficult. Eventually, he needed help with eating, toileting, and bathing. I consulted with a care manager and arranged for him to attend adult day center 4 times a week. I used the time he was away to run errands. It was heart-wrenching to see my father-in-law, who had once defended me from my mother-in-law's harsh words, no longer recognize my face and spend his days in a daze. Yet, his gentle nature remained, and he often thanked me. I don't know who you are, but thank you for everything. No problem. I wiped his mouth with gauze and removed his bib, quietly shedding tears. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law laughed loudly at the TV and dressed up for concerts and theater on weekends. Tom, too, had suddenly increased his overtime and business trips a few years ago, and he often left the house on weekends without saying where he was going, hardly ever being home. It had been 10 years since I started caring for my father-in-law. One evening, when he had no appetite, I touched his forehead and felt he had a fever. As usual, Tom and my mother-in-law were out having fun. After rushing my father-in-law to the hospital's emergency department, he was diagnosed with pneumonia and immediately admitted. I thought he would recover quickly, but his condition worsened, and a few days later, my father-in-law passed away. Overwhelmed by the sudden loss, Tom and his mother lashed out at me. "Why didn't you notice sooner?" "I'm sorry. Such a useless daughter-in-law." Tom acted as the chief mourner, and surrounded by family, my father-in-law was sent off to heaven. After the funeral, I returned home and sat on the floor in my mourning clothes, stunned. Memories of my father-in-law flooded back, and tears flowed uncontrollably. Seeing me weep bitterly, Tom and his mother, now in casual clothes, laughed with beers in hand. Despite having drunk heavily at the meal, they seemed ready to drink more. "You must be relieved, right? Stop acting like the good wife." I didn't have the energy to argue and just stroked the sewing box my father-in-law had made, while Tom smirked. "If that trash means so much to you, take it with you." "Take it where?" "To wherever you want. This isn't your home anymore." "What?" As I asked again, Tom and his mother burst into crude laughter. Their malicious grins matched as they said, "Finally, you're done taking care of him, get a divorce and get out. You're an eyesore. I have a mistress and an illegitimate child. I have no use for you anymore." Huh, he even has a child. I thought to myself, surprisingly calm. Now that my father-in-law was gone, I had no attachment to this house. I signed the divorce papers Tom thrust at me, packed my clothes and other essentials into a suitcase, and the next day, I left the house holding the sewing box. As I started my car, I could hear Tom and his mother laughing behind me, anger boiling inside me. Foolish people. Do they think I'm just going to cry myself to sleep? Just wait and see. I'll avenge the disregard shown to my dear father-in-law. Until I found a new place, I moved into a business hotel. After unpacking, I confided in my friend Allie about what had happened. Allie had also been cheated on by her husband and was divorced. After receiving valuable advice over the phone, I steadily prepared for my future life. Soon after, I signed a lease for an apartment. I visited the city hall to fill out the necessary paperwork for my move and had busy days catching up with my former boss. Thanks to the savings I had from my working days, I could manage until the next payday. About a week later, Tom called me. Guessing what it was about, I deliberately ignored the phone for a while. Then, as the phone rang every 5 minutes and it became too annoying, I reluctantly answered to hear his mother screaming in tears. "Mary! What do you mean by moving out this week? They said this house and land are yours, so Tom and I can't live here anymore. It doesn't make any sense." Tom, like his mother, was sniffling, seemingly having broken down in panic. Laughing at how pathetic they sounded, I explained kindly. "It's exactly as I said. Your father left the house and land to me. But I'm kind because I'm giving you a week's notice. That's much better than being thrown out tomorrow, right?" My sarcastic comment left them speechless. But soon, Tom began to rant. "Don't joke. How can a daughter-in-law, leaving her son and his mother behind, inherit this place? Who do you think you are, acting all high and mighty? I'll sue you." As they took turns yelling, I sighed deeply. Truthfully, I'd prefer never to see you two again. "What? Please come to my apartment. Let's discuss what happens next." Even as I provided the date and address, Tom and his mother were still ranting over the phone, but I ignored them and hung up. The next day, at the appointed time, Tom and his mother showed up. A strange woman was with them. As soon as she saw me, she greeted me overly cheerfully. "Hi there, I'm Mirabelle." My mother-in-law, in a great mood, introduced her. "This is Tom's new wife. We're living together in the apartment." "Oh, really? It's only been a month since your father's funeral. You're remarried already?" I recoiled. Even though it's becoming more common to remarry before mourning periods are over, this was way too soon. Tom looked puzzled at my astonishment. "Come to think of it, you didn't seem surprised at all when I revealed I had a lover. Did you know?" It seemed he had envisioned me despairing and drowning in grief. I smiled wryly. "Your overtime and business trips suddenly increased years ago, but your salary stayed the same. I figured you were cheating. I just ignored it because I was busy caring for your father." "How boring. And who is this person?" Tom and his mother looked puzzled at Allie standing behind me. I turned to Allie and grinned. "She's here to provide moral support for this important discussion." "Tom, mother, you met her on the day of the funeral, didn't you?" "I don't know this person." My mother-in-law dismissed coldly, and Allie shrugged at me. "I certainly didn't expect you to bring your affair partner along." Then Tom became indignant. "It's not an affair. We've been together for 5 years." "That's right. We just met later in life." His mother joined in the protest vigorously. "She's not like you, a presumptuous woman. She's demure and modest, exactly what Tom deserves." Protected by Tom and his mother, Mirabelle looked smug, flaring her nostrils. Dressed in a floral dress, her long, straight black hair seemed fitting. Indeed, she seems to have a quiet demeanor. Her demure aura, long lashes, and pale skin reminded me of the type of movie star Tom likes. I could see why he was smitten. But a man who marries his mistress and even has a child hardly fits the image of modesty. Frowning, I listened as Tom continued. "You said you hated caregiving, so I was just waiting for the right timing." "Timing?" "Oh, waiting eagerly for your father to pass away." I felt nauseous at their appalling remarks. Unnoticed, I clenched my fist while my mother-in-law and Mirabelle chatted excitedly. "Unlike you, a defective product, this girl actually gave us an heir. She's young and cute, really perfect for our Tom." "Oh, is that so?" I replied nonchalantly, but thinking about how they would feel later made me smile. "Hey, that's creepy. What's up with that?" Tom asked, puzzled by my smile. I turned my gaze from Tom to Mirabelle, smiling as I asked. "By the way, Mirabelle, where did you and Tom meet?" Mirabelle blushed and hesitated, then giggled. "Hee, Tom first came to the club where I was working. Initially, he was with friends, but then he started coming alone and asking for me." Her sugary tone grated on my nerves. Yet Tom, apparently finding her actions adorable, pulled her closer. I fell for Mirabelle at first sight. It was like my first love. There were other beautiful women at the club, but I only had eyes for her. Tom spoke while practically drooling. Glancing aside, I saw Allie making a disgusted face, much like mine. "Mirabelle, did Tom hide the fact that he was married?" "No, I knew. But, you can't fight fate." Mirabelle flirtatiously shrugged as Tom defended her. "Don't blame Mirabelle. You're the one at fault." "Huh? Excuse me?" Surprised, I stared as Tom frowned and continued. "As soon as you started caregiving for Dad, you stopped caring about your appearance. When a wife becomes shabby and neglects herself, it's natural for her husband to look elsewhere." "That's right." His mother nodded along. "A wife's duty is to always look neat, but you neglected that. Unable to have children, lacking feminine charm, no wonder Tom got bored." "Your words, not mine." I immediately protested. "When I wanted to go to the salon while your father was at daycare, didn't you, mother-in-law, scold me saying, if you have that much free time, you should be doing housework? Was it like that?" My mother-in-law feigned ignorance, twisting her head. "And Tom, you scolded me too. Saying, don't waste money when you're not even working. I was so down because you wouldn't even let me buy cheap makeup from the drugstore." And now you say this. Tom pursed his lips as if he did no wrong. I don't know about that. Anyway, if I had met Mirabelle earlier, I wouldn't have married you. He smirked as if he had just remembered something. Acting all superior with just a supervisor title, ordering me around. It's cheeky for a wife to have a better title than her husband. I was taken aback by his unexpected words. I see. So that's why Tom disliked my working reduced hours and pressured me to quit. Thank you, Tom, I said, grinning as Mirabelle cozied up to Tom. I then shoved a photo in front of Mirabelle's nose. I can see why Tom is smitten. Mirabelle, you are cute. Suddenly, Mirabelle's expression turned fierce. She snatched the photo from my hands and hid it in her pocket, but I quickly pulled out another stack of photos from my bag and laid them out on the table. It's useless. I have plenty more. And even if you destroy these photos, I can always retrieve the PDF files from the detective agency. Mirabelle clicked her tongue and glared at me menacingly. The quiet impression she had earlier vanished. Now looking like she could snap at any moment. Tom and his mother gasped as they glanced at the photo. No wonder, since it was a photo of Mirabelle holding a baby in a christening dress, with an unknown man beside her. Against a maternity hospital backdrop. It seems likely that the hospital staff took the photo as a keepsake when she was discharged. Hey, who is this guy? Tom asked Mirabelle. As Tom nervously asked her, I read from the documents I received from the detective agency. Wow, there's a missing persons report filed by this man. Mirabelle, you ran off with his credit card debts and a baby, huh? Tom and his mother froze, and I smiled at them. Oh. You two didn't know? No, what are you talking about? Mirabelle has only ever been interested in Tom. Mirabelle tried to cling to Tom's arm with a forced smile. But Tom stepped back, giving her a cold look. Mirabelle, were you deceiving me? So it's not true. Everything your wife said is a lie. But this person paid for an investigation. It's unlikely to be fake, Tom retorted, his cheeks stiffening. Mirabelle became defensive. And I spoke with a wry smile. You really wanted to marry Tom that badly, huh? Of course. You wanted him to take on your debts, right? But that's pointless. I shifted my gaze from Tom to his mother and chuckled. This person is already overwhelmed with the debt your mother accumulated, right? Tom glared sharply at his mother, who turned pale. Is what Mary's saying true, Mom? As his mother sweated. I continued, unfazed, and pulled out another investigative report. 7 years ago, you started an affair with a man you met at a party, promising to marry him after father-in-law passed away. You lent him money until your savings ran out, then piled up more debts using Tom's credit card. By the way, the man is wanted for marriage fraud. Does that sound right, Mother? No response came, but her trembling made it clear. Cheating at the same time, like mother, like son, Allie remarked with odd admiration. Tom held his head and groaned. Caught in marriage fraud? Give me a break. But he confided in me alone that he was caring for his sick brother. His mother defended herself quickly. He said he couldn't pay for a $20,000 surgery, so I just... It's obviously a lie. Even if the criminal is caught, the money won't come back. Tom raised his voice, and his mother wilted, but then she quickly raised her head. It's okay. His inheritance and insurance money will come in. The inheritance is for Tom, and I'm probably the beneficiary of the insurance. Even after paying off the debts, there should be plenty left. Tom's face brightened at her words. Oh, right. Dad did save a lot of money. He was a boring but serious man, but being the only son of a landowner was appealing. After all, life is all about money, isn't it? As they grinned at each other, they suddenly froze. Too bad. The inheritance and insurance money are both going to Mary. The expressions vanished from their faces. Like robots, they jerkily turned their heads towards me, staring as if trying to bore holes through me. After a moment, Tom gave a forced laugh. Stop the bad jokes. How could a mere friend like you know that anyway? You seem to have forgotten. You and your mother were quite drunk at the memorial dinner. What? Tom and his mother frowned at me as I continued. After the dinner, didn't we reveal your father's will? Tom and his mother looked at each other and tilted their heads as if to say, what? You both laughed it off when Ali read that the insurance and inheritance were left to Mary. Everyone else agreed it made sense since I was the one who took care of your father alone. Their eyes bulged as Ali presented her business card. Sorry for the late introduction. I am the family attorney for your family. I took over your father's requests from the retired previous attorney. A family attorney? Tom muttered, his face turning pale. It's unbelievable. Leaving everything to a stranger instead of his wife and son. Mary, you must have seduced my husband. That's the only explanation. The two of them quieted down a bit. Tom, it's okay. It's just the ramblings of a senile old man, it'll be void. Oh, right, that's a relief. The date is 11 years ago. Ali interjected in a matter-of-fact tone. The will was written before your father developed dementia. So, the inheritance and insurance money really do go to Mary. Mirabelle, who had been watching, stood up and spoke in an annoyed tone. Whatever, Tom, let's get divorced. She handed her wedding ring to Tom. I accepted your proposal because you said you were the son of a landowner and worked for a big corporation. If your ex-wife takes the inheritance, there's no point in being married. Mirabelle. Sign the divorce papers and submit them to the city hall, okay? With that, Mirabelle left abruptly. Mom, what do we do? Mirabelle dumped me. Tom started sobbing, and his mother comforted him. Tommy, let's dump that cheating wife of yours. Next time, I'll find someone worthy of you. Mom. Tom clung to his mother, crying uncontrollably. Are we done here? Could you please leave now? I said with a look of disgust. Ali, with a stern face, continued. We'll be filing for compensation for the affair, so make sure you pay up. What? I should be the one filing a claim for being stuck with a defective daughter-in-law. Ali sharply retorted to the aggressive mother-in-law. How dare you say that after dumping all the caregiving on your daughter-in-law? We can take this to court if you want. The mother-in-law glared at me and Ali regretfully, realizing she would lose in court. She nudged the sniffling Tom and walked away, supporting his back. The con artist who scammed the mother-in-law hasn't been caught yet. It seems unlikely they'll recover the money, as the police have said. Furious, the mother-in-law found that Tom had been allocating his salary and bonuses to pay off her debts. He paid off my compensation in one go, and they were living peaceful days as a mother and son. However, it was a mistake for Tom to marry a third time on his mother's advice. A year into the marriage and still no children, they found out the issue was with Tom. How could you ruin my dreams? His mother lamented, infuriated, eventually disowning him. Tom's tyrannical behavior caused his third marriage to end in divorce as well. In desperation, Tom started taking out his frustrations on his subordinates and was reprimanded by his superiors, leading him to quit his job. He then began living off odd jobs, but old habits die hard, and he squandered money at clubs, spiraling into debt. Now, he struggles to make ends meet in a shabby apartment while repaying his debts. Meanwhile, his mother, despite being on a pension, continues to indulge in designer goods, getting herself into insurmountable debt. Forced to work despite her old age, she ended up in the hospital with a broken hip. After being discharged, she was told she needed caregiving, which Tom flatly refused to provide. When she demanded that I care for her because I was her former daughter-in-law, I promptly blocked her calls. It seems she tried reaching out to relatives too, but no one was willing to deal with her selfish behavior, and she faces a long wait for a care facility. She's distraught as her discharge date approaches. Truly, what goes around comes around. I returned to the company I previously worked for and started working full-time. Despite a 10-year gap and being placed in a department with younger supervisors, I'm learning a lot and really enjoying my workdays. On weekends, I engage in embroidery and patchwork in front of the sewing box my father-in-law made. Free from worrying about Tom and his mother. The insurance money and inheritance I received from my father-in-law, I donated to causes he cared about. Organizations supporting children with serious illnesses, and animal rescue and protection activities. I'm sure he would be happy about that in heaven. The 10 years I spent caring for my father-in-law were physically and mentally exhausting, but they were also a valuable time that we spent together. Now, I plan to use my time and money for myself and live a fulfilling life.